So, as was stated, this message and the next couple are kind of responses to the period of time where we came together and like opened up about, you know, the time span that we had off and just our interactions and what we took away. And the first thing that I felt God wanted me to, the first thing that I felt he wanted addressed was to go back over the identity part. And that's both God's identity and our identities relative to him. And see, it even goes further than that, because even to just like call out things for what they are. Some of the big things that came out of last week's time were that, one, there were people that, what was the term again? Compartmentalize their lives with God. And it becomes a matter of, well, we feel like we have a life separate from God, in the sense that we have a spiritual life and then we have our own life. And it's not a real thing. Like, even what I talked about last week with responding to that directly, and even so, that's also true here. See, the thing of it is that where God has come into our lives, he's come to bring life. Those were Jesus' words to us directly. To the woman at the well, he spoke about how he came to give a water that would never run out, to make her never thirst again, to bring eternal life. And see, we have that, but eternal life is a holistic thing. It encompasses the whole of our existence, the whole of our place. We become a part of the kingdom of God. And this is the identity that we carry. And even to go further, coming to Christ and being separated from the world, the identities that we bring, that come with that, go far beyond just having a life here, but having a certain reality as far as a shift in terms of the very concept of humanity and what that looks like. See, we stop being beholden to our pasts. We recognize very clearly that one thing that's talked about is that we are reborn, right? And even to be specific, like Brendan, you specifically stated last week that our pasts give us our identity.
I said they mold us.
Not what was reported. And this is the thing about it. And, you know, Astera had very much similar things to say. But the point is that part of the truth of the gospel is that our identity, we receive our identity from Christ. We're molded in his image. We receive an identity from God because it's been built into us. I mean, in Genesis, it is that God saw his creation when he made man and woman and said it was good. Also, I'm probably not going to be able to pull a lot of scripture here just because my Bible got lost. It got moved somewhere. Anyway, so if I misquote something, forgive me and correct me.
I have my child has Bible with me.
Anyways, though, there's this thing where there is a paradigm shift that needs to come in with our identities and the way that we see ourselves. This kind of thing where God is the one who shapes and molds us, where God is the one who qualifies us. And I understand like that can be really difficult where we don't receive that. But see, part of this whole series is in order to draw attention to this fact that so much of our identity is going to play in to what the enemy, going to be a part of what the enemy attacks, and that's going to play into our ability to even combat this whole thing. See, there's this really vicious cycle that happens here with it, where we come to God and we receive a new life. And the enemy comes in and draws on our past to illustrate why we're disqualified from that life. And as a result of that, we have to stand on this belief that we have a new life in order to maintain that. Otherwise, we end up crumbling in response where we're looking at our past. Be it recent past, be it long ago past, whatever we can grab onto. And that's always going to be a struggle, because they will always do that, especially with the things that we don't receive forgiveness on. The things that we continue to look at as points of shame or guilt, the things that we specifically hold on to say, or even our glory days. Like, we have to understand that there's also the side of it where with the prideful being, where we look back on things that were good back in the past, and we hold on to those as reasons to not move forward. We always look back as things that we're going to go back to, in case this whole thing that God's doing fails. So if he doesn't come through, we have a backup plan that'll make us happy. Or we have something that we'll hold on to that will justify us or validate us. And these are all things that need to be relinquished when we receive this new life. Because even that can become a tool by which the enemy can mislead you, misdirect you, take you and say, well, just in case God doesn't come through, you'll be okay. And that can create a subconscious level of mistrust between yourself and God, where you can sit back and not believe in him and still be comfortable. Because one of the big struggles with identity here is that a lot of people, we want to just be good enough. A lot of people, we want to be okay. We don't want to hurt. We don't want to feel a lot of things. And even the things that we receive that are good tend to be passing because we don't let them touch our hearts. We just receive them in the moment as, positive affirmation. You can have somebody give you a word at a church group, and you'll receive that with the same level of transformation, the same level of heart that you would as somebody just saying, hey, you look really good today. Every time. So, in essence, when we look back at this subject of identity, there's this very real need to look at this cycle of it, and to even step back into this place of understanding that this is a new life. It's a new life that we're being led through, that we're following through, not one that we're composing and compiling. Because see, the reality of life in the outside of God is that we compose our identity. We take the pieces of things that we want and we make them into who we think we should be. Or, in a less pleasant way, we take the pieces of things that we believe we are because it's just what life has thrown at us. And we let that be the compilation of who we are. See, in all these things, there's a reactive element of it. They're the things that we hold on to, and then they're the things that are thrown at us, and all of this compiles together. And even in the answers to those questions, you can see that in some of us, there were places where there were real hurts that have lingered on in our hearts, some of us. There are real things where we still believe or where we struggle to step forward in things or to even be open about them because of what has been said, where things have been lobbed at us, those figurative fiery darts that the enemy has cast, whether they be from him or be they from people who he's used. And those are the things that we hold on to and we let shape us and mold us. Essentially, the thing that we end up needing, especially in the context of spiritual warfare, is to be willing to for lack of a better word, submit to the process of change that comes from this new identity. And even to be receptive to the things that God's saying and doing. If God tells you that he loves you, then it's important for you to be receptive to that, to receive that, and to stand on that. And when we were talking about the equipping message, my dad actually got up and gave a very good message about her experience and about the importance of that. How he was highlighting how David was able to grab onto the experiences he had with God and hold on to those, and that in part allowed him to have the faith to go stand up to Goliath. And the value of that is that as we grow in that relationship with God, we're going to have experiences where God is breaking through all that stuff that the world has fed us, and even where the enemy is still attacking us. God will answer those questions, and he will come against that time and time again.
Where you guys are going?
And there is a place for us to step in and receive this change. But it also bears on us to not. It's also important for us to not only stand on that, be open to that change, but also to remember those experiences and stand on those.
Anything else?
So I mean, like, as far as a question is concerned for everybody in here, can you think of one experience you've had with God where he stood against one of the negative things that you wrote in those notes? Or alternately, where he's propped up one of the positive things, highlighted and said, this is who you are. See, one of the really difficult things with spiritual warfare in particular, where it pertains to identity, is that the enemy does not want you to be able to hold on to those experiences. He's going to work overtime for you to dismiss them time and time again. And that's where community comes into play, where sometimes you're going to need other people around you to be able to remind you of the things that you shared with them, that God shared with you. Because where we get really caught up in the fight, it can feel like a hopeless battle. And we can forget the things that God has done and said to try to meet us and show us who he is. And when that happens, it's important for us to have other people there to help us. Because again, one of the big things from that video is getting people out of that mindset of it just being us and God. And being able to look at the world in 3 dimensions and see that there's a lot more. And that's not only a lot more in the sense that there's a lot more working against us, but there's also a lot more that we can grab onto to work for us. One of the biggest things just to be real, when we look at even our history and of warfare as human beings, one thing that we've seen is that ingenuity has been one of the most successful means of winning battles. That's not altogether different here in this field. There's a place where we talk about vigilance and awareness, where we talk about perception. These are important things in being able to look and recognize where you have a resource or somebody that can help you, where somebody cares about you, where somebody wants to protect you, where God's going to move, and knowing where he's leading you. All these different little things that we can do and we can grab onto that can help safeguard us. Because if we're left with just us and God, and we're not even acknowledging the enemy at our back breaking us down, we're just going to lose ourselves. We're going to, and as such, or in the other way around, we're going to lose who God is. So another thing to go with that, like even just to talk for a moment about God and his person and who he truly is. Talking about the equipping thing video, like talking about the equipping message in general, it was looking back to Jesus and the cross and what that meant. That love that God had, that he would become man in order just to die for us. Just for that sole purpose of sacrificing himself for us as one final sacrifice to save the world. And there's a thing with that where even to call back to the equipping message and that particular point that Jesus did that looking at us for who we are. Not who he wanted us to be, but who we are. Those were the people in the past, the people in that present, and looking on to the people in the future. And knowing how many of them were going to be sinning against him, knowing that nobody wanted him, and we actually went to John 3 and looked over that particular passage about where Jesus talked about the verdict that had been laid down by heaven, that men love darkness, and that's where they wanted to stay. Jesus came knowing that he was going to be rejected, and he still did what he did. Because it never, ever, ever mattered that the world didn't want him. All that mattered is that he wanted the world, and he wanted everybody in it to be saved. And that was his heart. See, there's nothing reactive about God's love for us. He doesn't take it away or anything like that. It's not relative to how much we do or how good we do. It's not relative to how well we perform or how well we please him. His love is consistent. He died once and for all the sins, all the things, to cover it all and to be all in that. And that doesn't change based on our perception. The great struggle, again, with the enemy here is that he's going to work in overtime to try to take that away from us. Like, we're all familiar with the term gaslighting, right? And see, the thing of it is that that is a common practice of the enemy, is to try to gaslight us, to give us a different reality from what we can hold on to. They try to make us believe that those experiences with God are lies, that we're deluding ourselves. And the frustrating thing about that is, like, when you have those really crazy experiences where God does something like bringing in like an object online to give a message out loud, or when you get taken up to heaven for a moment and he shares something with you. There are all these different facets where he will do things. Even in the scriptures, we look at the story of how when Jesus came back, he had Thomas put his fingers in the holes in hands, where it was just like, that was important. because that was an experience that Thomas would not be able to give up entirely. Not only was it a proof, not only was it evidence, but it was also something to be that would be used later when Thomas went to India and was doing the apostolic work that he did there, and the enemy would come at him and try to make him feel down because he was struggling with the culture there. See, we all go through these struggles, and God doesn't abandon us in them. Even when he's quiet, he's still there with us. Even when he doesn't provide us the things that we want, he's still loving us. And sometimes the great struggle that we have with our limited perception is that we don't always recognize what all God is doing or why he's protecting us from something or the other. I only go into this because I'm told to. If we're given an instance where we're needing something really, really bad, and God doesn't answer you when you ask him if he's going to give it to you, and then you don't end up receiving it, we oftentimes fail to understand that the reason why he didn't tell you that you weren't going to get it was because he knew you'd fight it, and he wanted you to listen. He wanted you to take a moment to see where your heart's really at. And then when it comes time and you don't receive that thing you need, or that you feel you need, and you get disappointed and angry at God because he didn't provide it for you, even though he didn't say he was going to, you still blame him. That says something about your heart. And that's something and that's a part of your identity, and a part of those things that need to be let go. Because in all of these things, they will separate us. And a lot of times there are things where they're the seeds that the enemy has planted and they become part of us. And it needs to be stated that we all have things that the enemy has planted in us and that are still bearing bitter fruit. And those are the points where we will struggle with God because we don't know how to let those go. You know, answering those questions at the beginning of the message here, like mine in particular, that I can highlight, you know, feeling like I'm not equipped to lead. That's something that I've been leading groups for close to a decade now. And the thing of it is that despite all that time and experience, I still feel like I'm not the right person for it. Because there are parts of me that still feel like I don't totally belong to God in this place. And I recognize that those are not things that God put in there. And those are not things that are supposed to be there. It's not humility. It's doubt and fear. And it's stuff that's been watered by the enemy time and time again. It's something that was put there by him, by them, and then watered by them. It's not something that I chose. It's not something that I jumped up and said, like, I want to never believe in myself. But it is something that's there. And it's something that makes it difficult for me to always trust God with the things that he's telling me to do. And I recognize that for me, that's something that I need to let go of. Because this is a part of me right now. And it's not supposed to be. We all have that stuff. Whether it's a lack of hope, or just the hurt that people have dropped on you because of their judgments, or maybe it's just a whole lot of things all at once, time and time again. We all have those things. I think one of the key things that I kept being told to talk about with this particular revisiting of identity is to talk about kind of the restructuring of our view of what it means to be human that needs to happen with God. Because see, the thing of it is that the world has a varied view of what it means. And it changes with culture to culture, it changes with person to person. We all have our own kind of little worlds of what we believe it means to be a human being. But the thing that we end up needing to do is to let God restructure what that means. And the thing of it is that, I can say from experience, when he restructured that with me, it involved a lot of looking back to Genesis and creation. That place of being a co-worker with him, a co-laborer with God, also being part of a community, not only with God but with other people, Adam and Eve. This place of being constantly in a relationship with God. See, we all have that whole thing. It's as much a part of our identity to need something as much as it is to live and breathe. See, we need more than just, how do I put this? We need God, or we need something to hold on to believe in, because hope is intrinsic to our existence. In 1 Corinthians 13, Paul talks about the three important things being faith, love, and hope. Those three things carry on beyond this life and into heaven. Those are the three things that remain when, the gifts fade after we've gone there. Hope is intrinsic. That's an innate component of our very existence that we need to have. And the best place that we can find hope is in God, because he's going to be the most faithful on it. Even if we don't always see it for what it is, or even if we don't receive it, he's still going to be it, and he's still going to do it. And it's not wrong to want to hope for things. It's not wrong to want to believe in something. The idea that it is wrong is a delusion in and of itself, because it's robbing us of a very fundamental component of our character as people, as human beings. When we're left without hope, we find ourselves in states of depression, anxiety. It breeds fear. And then those become parts of our identity, because suddenly we become an anxious person, a depressed person, a doubtful person, a person that's afraid. Because we've been robbed of that fundamental element of life and breath. And see, the world and the enemy specifically would try to teach us that hope is a thing that can make you weak. And that's wrong. Just like the idea that love will make you weak. That's also wrong, because that's another fundamental element of us. To be a human being is to need love, to need hope, to have faith. To be a human being, especially in the context of God, is to know that you're loved, to know that you're cared for, to know that you're protected, to know that you're a part of something bigger than yourself, and that other people are a part of that as well. To be able to take care of other people, to be able to love other people, and to not be ashamed of that. That's a part of this identity that we're called into through the Holy Spirit when we receive him. Because that's a part of who God is. See, we oftentimes forget that we carry his breath. And as such, we carry his breath, we carry his character to an extent. You can look at the worst of people and you'll still find good things. You can look at the best of people and you'll still find bad things. But in all these things, it's this constant crafting that the world does, and this constant effort to change us and mold us in different things. But highlighting that point in people that have become completely bereft of any righteousness or goodness, and you'll still find them being gracious or generous, being honest, or even at times loving. There are stories of psychopathic serial killers who go out and murder people and then come home and love their families with all their hearts. I mean, half the stories involved are, I never knew he was that kind of person. They're just baffled and amazed that this was what he was doing. Yeah. Dusty knows Dusty could probably name several. But the point is that this is something that we carry, with or without recognizing it, with or without even wanting to acknowledge it. The residue of God's breath is something that exists in all of humanity, because carrying his image, even for those that are lost, even for those that are without the Spirit, they still have components. And it's when we end up coming back to him and finding that renewal and that redemption, that's where we truly have an opportunity to come to life. If we will not be like the soil that has the seeds fall by the wayside and get picked off by the birds. So, to kind of put it into perspective here, and to kind of break the whole thing down to the most basic elements of this. Our identity is something that God shows us. It's something that he gives us. It's something that's received by following Jesus. God's identity is something that doesn't change. He is who he is. He is his own person, his own being, just as each of us are our own persons and our own beings. We're our own little special unicorns, as it were. For better or for worse. And the thing of it is that there are parts of that need to be relinquished, that need to be let go of so that God can change them. We basically have to be willing to say, okay, change me. Make more of what you want and less of what you don't. Purge the world and the seeds of the enemy from my heart and soul so that I can be more like your son. It's the best way that I can think to put that part of letting this go. But also recognizing and being able to trust that God's going to be there and he's going to do it because he has us on his heart. We're his sons and daughters, his children that he loves with everything. And just because we haven't felt protected doesn't mean he hasn't been doing it. Just because we haven't felt like he's been taking care of us or doing the things that we're asking him to do doesn't mean he hasn't been answering our prayers. Sometimes we just have to accept that he said no and be able to live with that. Just as much as sometimes we need to be okay with not being okay for a little bit, and even inviting him into that. But that's a rabbit trail in a way. Going back to what I was trying to say to reduce this whole thing. We receive our identity from God, and God's identity doesn't change, and that we will reflect God as we let him remove those things that the world has built in us, those things that the enemy has built in us as well. Because again, I have to state the fact again that the enemy is his own, the demons are their own individual beings. They have their own individual personalities and their own individual wills. They choose to follow Satan, who has his own individual will. And they're an army that is actively against us, who's trying to get you and you and you and every one of us to believe that we're not a part of God's kingdom. Even though we've said those prayers and we've given our lives to him, and he's accepted us, forgiven us the sins that we've carried and the things that we've done, and provided us an opportunity, an atmosphere for us to have hope, to have faith, and to be loved. But the enemy's always going to bring us back to this place where they want us to not believe that. And that's where the fight comes in. So. There's nothing else that will ever provide us as strong or as clear of an identity as what God can provide for us. Because see, the truth of the matter is in all those other things, whether it's the attacks that the enemy is lobbing at us or the things that we're trying to make into our identities, we can only even see ourselves in part. Oftentimes we don't even know, just flying off the cuff, we don't always know the truth of our heart. But God does. And if he says something about your heart, it's probably something he's seeing. And I say that sarcastically when I shouldn't, and I should just state the fact. He knows what he's seeing. He knows what he's working with. He knows who he's talking to and who they are. If he says you have a good heart, it's because you have a good heart and he sees that. And it doesn't really matter if anybody else doesn't, in the sense that their perception of you doesn't change what he sees. Because at the end of the day, God's going to be right and they're going to be wrong. Even if that person that's wrong is you. And it's you fighting with him. He's right about who you are. And stepping into that will provide you a stronger state of life, that rock to stand on. to be okay and to survive the rest of everything that's going to happen before you get to go be with him. And he's a good one to be with, because there's no one more loving, more caring, more gentle, more compassionate than God. And we can see that in the character that he illustrated through the Gospels with Jesus Christ. Oftentimes we compartmentalize them more than we should. We look at Jesus and we look at God and God the Father, and we see two different beings, when in reality, God in the New Testament is the same as God in the Old Testament. We just miss a lot. The Israelites had a certain focus on stories of things that God did, but it's only when you really look at the prophets and what God's trying to say, the heart that he's trying to convey through those prophets, that you really get hit with the reality that, yeah, Jesus and God are very much so the same. Same heart, same mind, same desire for reconciliation. And these are the things to stand on. To let God restructure our very view of what it is to be human. And then to be okay in that. And to stand in that and the experiences that come with that as God reveals himself more and more. Reveals himself and reveals us to ourselves. And that's all I got.